Hello, welcome back to our Guardians of Magic book, chapter 23 now. Now, where we'd left it, Phoebe had been listening to Zam's spoon because she'd found Zam's workshop in his kitchen and all those gingerbread people that Zam had made underneath the tumble downs, because she'd fallen through the gaps in the rocks and she'd seen that girl with her sword and she'd dropped her cello and she'd fallen down, which the girl had caught. So we'll see what becomes of that. Now, today, and for this week, I've got my reading companion here. This is Ray, the raven. Very clever birds, ravens. Very clever birds. Maybe you could send me some pictures of your reading companions. But I like having a reading companion because they can listen and they don't stop you to ask questions. They just listen as you're reading the story. So you could send me some of your reading companions. So this is chapter 23, and it's called Bathsheba's Wish. It starts with a picture. I'll show you the picture on it. We can see that she's got the cello that Phoebe had dropped. Bathsheba looked at the cello the girl had dropped when she fell between the boulders. Then she looked at the sword in her hand. Both the cello and the handle of her warple sword were glowing. This must be the same tree magic that the bears in her dream had talked about. She'd been so sure the girl with the cello had been a professional princess, just like Euphemia Goldencurls. But she'd been wrong. Just then, the soft, beguiling sound of flute music floated past Bathsheba, carried on a gentle breeze. She recognised it immediately. No, not again! Leaving the cello behind, she ran towards the sound. There in the distance, right on the edge of the great wood, sitting under a tree, was Euphemia Goldencurls, playing her flute. She was never going to give up. As Bathsheba quickened her pace, she saw the grey giant emerge from the tumble downs, his great face creased into an enchanted smile, his eyelids heavy. Bathsheba could see clearly that the flute was mesmerising him, drawing the giant into a trap. Sure enough, as he reached Euphemia, there was the whir of harpoons being fired from the cover of the trees and a sickening thud as they hit home. The chains went taut, as they had the last time, and the giant slayer's wagon came bursting into view, with the armoured giant slayers clinging on for dear life. Bathsheba was too far away to help him, so she changed direction and made for the tree line. The giant was now careering through the forest directly towards her. Bathsheba had a chance to intercept the wagon, but it wasn't going to be easy. She wished with all her might, "Cut the chain, Cloudhorse, Cloudhorse, far from view. Make this, The giant thundered past, knocking Bathsheba to one side and sending her crashing into a tree trunk before she fell to the forest floor. In the blackness, Bathsheba felt the warmth on her cheek, then something soft nuzzling her face. She opened her eyes slowly and tried to focus. She was looking up at a velvet muzzle. Above it, two blue eyes with long lashes were staring back at her. I wonder what it could be. She could see a shock of cloud-white hair above them. It was a horse. It lowered its muzzle and nudged her gently under the chin, encouraging her to stand up. As Bathsheba got to her feet, she saw that the horse was holding the handle of the warple sword in its mouth, and it seemed to be looking at her. She took the sword. "Thank you," she said, and then stepped back with a gasp as two enormous white feathered wings spread out on either side of the horse, and it lowered its head. Snorted softly and pawed at the ground with one hoof. You're a cloud horse," she whispered, astonished. "You're real, and—" The horse snorted again, pawed the ground insistently. "Do you mean I can ride you?" asked Bathsheba. The cloud horse nodded. Carefully, Bathsheba, heart pounding fast, stepped round to the side of the horse and climbed up onto its back, between the magnificent outstretched wings. She reached forward, clutching the mane with one hand, and instantly the horse began to beat powerful wings. In moments, they were soaring up out of the dappled light of the forest floor and into the clear blue sky. Bathsheba looked down. She could hardly believe it. She was flying on a cloud horse, a real cloud horse. Below them was the jagged path through the forest made by the wounded giant. I'll show you the picture there of the cloud horse. As Bathsheba is being taken up out of the forest. The Cloud Horse had seen it too, for it swerved down through the air in a wide arc and followed the trail of splintered and fallen trees. There, up ahead, were the Giant Slayer's wagon, being pulled by the harpooned giant. Euphemia was brandishing her Warple sword while behind her Tam and Shanta held spiked weights at the back of the increasingly tired giant. The Cloud Horse swooped down even lower, and Bathsheba reached out with the tip of her Warple sword as she knocked Tam and Shanta's helmets off, swept the wig clean off the astonished Euphemia's head. The Cloud Horse flew back up into the air and turned, flying directly towards the oncoming Giant Slayers, allowing Bathsheba to slice through the harpoon chains, making the wagon lurch off the path and hit a tree. The giant stumbled to a halt, breathing heavily, his hands on its hips, as he turned slowly round and glared at the upturned wagon, and the Giant Slayers sprawled on the ground beside it. With a grimace, the giant reached behind his back and pulled out a handful of harpoons. He threw them to the ground in disgust as the terrified Giant Slayers leapt to their feet, turned tail and ran. The Cloud Horse swooped down, beating its wings slowly as it hovered just above the forest floor. To show you on there, there's the astonished Euphemia Goldencurls who lost her wig. She looks extremely angry. Bathsheba slipped off its back and onto the ground. "Thank you," she said, stroking its flank. "That was amazing." The Cloud Horse snorted, tossing its head, and with a steady beat of wings, it rose back into the air and flew off across the treetops. Bathsheba watched it go. She felt exhilarated. A Cloud Horse had answered her wish. Euphemia and her nasty crew had been taught a lesson they'd never forget. She stood for a moment until the Cloud Horse disappeared from sight, and then she became aware of heavy breathing. She looked up at the giant, who was still catching his breath, and sheathing her Warple sword, she broke into a huge smile. She reached into her tunic and took out her notepad and pencil. "No, don't tell me," she said. "Your name is Budley Bristletoe." "How did you know?" asked the giant, astonished. "I study giants," said Bathsheba, settling herself on the upturned wagon and turning a fresh page in her book. "Now what I really want to know is why when you must realise it's a trap, you still can't resist the sound of the music." Budley Bristletoe straightened up and stroked his chin thoughtfully. "It's not just any music," he said. "It's the music that comes from that." He pointed to something half hidden in the undergrowth. Bathsheba looked down. There, beside the wagon, was Euphemia's flute, glowing brightly. At Bathsheba's side, her Warple sword, she realised, was glowing equally brightly. Bathsheba smiled. "It must be tree magic," she said. "I can be clumsy," admitted Budley Bristletoe, lying on his back and looking up at the sky through the forest canopy. "I never meant to knock down those tree houses. I just didn't see them in time." "Was that how the trouble started?" asked Bathsheba. "I suppose so," said Budley. He twiddled the ends of his moss-covered moustache with his enormous spatula-like fingers, and the shouting didn't help. "The townsfolk shouted at you," said Bathsheba. "No, I did the shouting. It's what we giants do when we're scared. But now I think about it, I suppose it could be a little frightening for us small people," Budley continued with a frown. "You might try and work on the shouting," said Bathsheba, "and staying away from Beam." And there's Budley Bristletoe with Bathsheba. Oh, turn it the right way. "I've tried," said Budley, "but sometimes they play music in the town square, and it always sounds so exciting and full of life. I've told myself lots of times that I would just listen quietly from a distance, but before I knew it, I'd find myself dancing, which is when—" "The tree houses got knocked down," said Bathsheba. "Yes, and the trouble started," agreed Budley. "Now the Great Wood isn't safe for giants anymore." "Well, it's not your fault," said Bathsheba, closing her notebook and getting to her feet. I just wish the townsfolk could understand that. Budley carefully put the wagon the right way up, and Bathsheba slipped the flute into her backpack. They began to walk back towards the Tumbledowns, with Budley pulling the wagon behind him. "That flying horse was amazing," said Budley. "Where did you find it?" "It was amazing," agreed Bathsheba, "but I didn't find it. It found me. I made a wish, and there it was. I think it might have had something to do with the tree magic too." "The old parts of the Great Wood are full of tree magic," said Budley, as they stepped out from the forest and into the Tumbledowns. "But the small people make machines to chop down the forest. If there's no forest, all the tree magic will be gone." "Machines?" asked Bathsheba. But before Budley could reply, another voice interrupted them. "Tin men," said a girl standing on the boulder, looking down at them. She was holding a cello. "You must be Bathsheba Greengrass from Beam," said the girl, who seemed to be enjoying Bathsheba's look of surprise. "My cello's been telling me all about you. Thank you for looking after her. My name's Phoebe Limetree, and I'm from Nightingale." "And I'm Zam Zephyr," said the boy, stepping out from behind the boulder next to Phoebe, "from Troutwine." Bathsheba's eyes widened. Giants were emerging from all around, in robes of moss, shawls of bark, and gowns of woven glade grass. Griselle Barkfire appeared, sweeping back her mushroom-flecked hair, gave Bathsheba a wide, gap-toothed smile. "We thought the giant slayers had finally got Budley." She beamed down at Bathsheba. "But then you went chasing after them into the forest to save him, and now here you both are." The delicious smell of freshly baked bread floated past on the breeze, and Bathsheba saw that the giants were holding baskets containing large loaves. She hopped over to join Zam and Phoebe, while the giants collected in small groups of 2s and 3s to eat their bread. "I met a cloud horse," said Bathsheba excitedly. "A real one. I made a wish, and there it was. It let me fly on its back, and we defeated the giant slayers together before it flew away." "It's true," said Budley, who was sitting nearby, his mouth full of bread. "Bathsheba and the cloud horse saved my life." Zam and Phoebe exchanged looks. "You made a wish? Interesting," said Phoebe. "Come down to the cavern kitchen," said Zam, "and tell us all about it."